Welcome to Elemental Energy, the podcast where we discuss how to simplify decarbonization. Here, we will introduce emerging low-carbon energy technologies and give you insight on how to navigate and support the evolving energy landscape. It is our goal to develop content to give you confidence to help transition the market and make low-carbon energy reliable and affordable. I'm your host, Marcia Leonard. Today's episode, we're discussing hydrogen and why it's being seen as a key enabler in the decarbonization of the energy sector, as well as hard to abate sectors like that of concrete and steel. So I am joined today by someone who actually has his own podcast solely on the topic of hydrogen, and it's mainly surrounding how to make it economically viable. I'm joined today by somebody who has over 250 of contents of episodes surrounding only hydrogen. I don't know how you do it, Paul Rodden. Welcome to Elemental
We're at
Energy, man.
300 now, something like that. It's ridiculous.
Paul, that's amazing. So, Paul, please introduce yourself and then tell me how you got into this hydrogen journey.
Yeah, who am I and what do I do? So, yeah, my name is Paul Rodden, and I've I started up the podcast with my business partner and my cohort in hydrogen crime about 2.5 years ago, almost. So, I guess it was March of 2021. I think that's about right. And really, it was just hydrogen was something that I was passionate about and had been doing deep dive studies into hydrogen for about a year before that. And he found it really interesting when I was talking to him about it and felt like the knowledge that I had needed to be shared with the world. And with my background in energy, location analytics, finance, and economics, all kind of rolled up into one ball. How can we get that out and deal with hydrogen? So we're talking about hydrogen, the economics around it, the different technologies that apply to the space and where projects are being developed around the world. Sometimes we have some interviews too, but that's really the gist of the podcast, is getting some good commentary and news to the world. Some people that may have either rose-colored glasses about a topic, or people that just don't know what they don't know, bringing that out into the open more. Talking about this natural hydrogen that people had no idea about. That was actually a really fun venture that kind of exploded the podcast open, was talking about natural hydrogen. This is a fun story. I had just reported on, was it Simvita? I can't remember the company that I was reporting on, but it was before Simvita was doing their bacteria work, in situ work with bacteria and hydrogen, and they were drilling for locations. And I put out the podcast, and I have some close friends who run a very successful engineering firm, like a reserves engineering firm, and they asked to talk about it, and they said, this can't happen, natural hydrogen. It can't happen. And I said, I'm not a geologist, I'm not a geophysicist, I'm not an engineer. I'm just reporting what I know, what I've read. And they said, okay, well, we've got a lot of data. We'll go in and check and verify. And I got an email back from them 2 days later saying, we analyze these helium deposits, and there's hydrogen everywhere. It's off the charts in some of these spots. We had no idea because we never looked for it. And so that was one of those eye-opening moments for me, was that I'm making a difference with this, and it's important, and it's grown to where we're the number one hydrogen podcast, and I think we're in the top 0.5% or something like that of all podcasts, something like that. So our market's great. We're hitting the people that need to hear what we're talking about, and just bigger and brighter things in the future for us.
So, Paul, one thing I really love about how you structure your podcast is you go out and you find different articles surrounding hydrogen and new releases. And quite honestly, you're how I get some of my hydrogen information because you're having the updates on the latest article releases. So I really appreciate the content that you generate because it helps me get those, 10 to 15 quick minute updates. And I really do appreciate it. So if you are in the hydrogen industry, I highly, highly, highly suggest Paul's podcast, The Hydrogen Podcast. It's
Thank
really
you.
defined.
Thank you.
Okay, so Paul, we had a bit of a conversation last week when we were at this conference where I actually got to deliver a panel with some of the amazing hydrogen movers in the space. But let's talk about why hydrogen is a focus in today's market. Let's give everybody the big, big picture.
Well, when you think about energy in general, there's legacy oil and gas, which has been using hydrogen for decades. And so there's an easy, you can kind of visualize the application where hydrogen fits into oil and gas. They use it for, cracking and creating their derivatives. The fertilizer sector uses hydrogen for ammonia generation, which goes into making the fertilizer. But then you start thinking about potentially other applications that hydrogen can be used in. Like say, like take nuclear for instance. Nuclear is a great source of energy, but you can't take it with you. Hydrogen's a way to make that energy source mobile, and you can use that with electrolysis with water, and you have your hydrogen with that. And it's really the same with renewables. You can't store that energy that gets generated unless you're using some kind of battery setup or hydrogen as a storage medium for the electricity that's generated. So people are starting to realize that the most abundant element in the universe, hydrogen, has this massive upside potential if we can just unlock it. And there are so many sources and ways to get hydrogen that the future seems almost limitless with applications, derivatives, and generating sources, the feedstock. And so I think that's one of the reasons why people are seeing it as such a an opportunity. There's also the decarbonization aspect of it. Burning hydrocarbons does release CO2, and while that is a greenhouse gas, there are other particulates that get emitted when burning hydrocarbons, and that's to me the big source of why to move away, start transitioning away from burning hydrocarbons to leveraging hydrogen for that energy. Because when you're burning gasoline, diesel, whatever, is hydrogen is the main component of what's generating that energy. The other elements that are involved, carbon, for instance, is just the bonding element so that you can get more hydrogen together in a liquid state in standard temperatures and pressures. So if we can just leverage that dense energy source of hydrogen, that's where we're going to really see the big changes in the future. And that's why I think there's that big focus in hydrogen today is just how can we unlock it?
So let's talk briefly on some of the hard to abate industrial sectors. Let's go into why it's kind of seen as a leading decarbonization effort in those areas.
Well, I think one of the reasons why the hard to abate term is so critical is there are some sectors that can be electrified. The hard to abate sectors are the ones that can't. So, you're talking steel, cement, glass, aluminum, the smelting, the high heat intense industries. You also have, I believe, hard to abate sectors are also in transportation. So, long haul trucking, shipping, aviation. These are all industries that are very hard to be electrified. And that's where hydrogen steps in as an opportunity to again, like you said, decarbonize these sectors uh, without having to leverage electricity, batteries, things that just are incredibly heavy. And ultimately, when you get so many batteries, it just becomes a no go. Take long haul transportation, for instance. Whenever you add so many batteries to these trucks, they become so heavy that the weight that they're allowed to carry gets decreased significantly. With hydrogen fuel cells, you don't have that problem. Uh, with steel or cement, you can't you can't use batteries for that. It just doesn't work. So hydrogen can again come in, and if we're talking about a transition, you can still use that natural gas source, but you can start blending in hydrogen. And as technology gets better adapted to leveraging hydrogen, you can decrease that reliance on the natural gas and use more hydrogen. And I think that's where we're going to really see those hard to abate sectors start to move in. With steel and cement, a lot of people talk about that. I think that's going to be a much longer runway just because of the costs associated with it. I think you'll see it more in shipping and transportation, whether it's hydrogen fuel cells in long haul trucking or aviation, or maybe something like ammonia or methanol as hydrogen derivatives for shipping. And I think that's where you'll start seeing it initially. And I mean, you're already starting to see it a lot in Europe, for instance, with trains, buses. In the US, Hyzon, Nikola, where some of the other big ones coming out, Volvo, Daimler Trucking, big names, Cummins, big names coming out with hydrogen opportunities. So I think there's just so many different hard to abate sectors that are vying for that buildup. And now that the IRA has come out and the hubs have been announced, now is when you're going to see all those economics start to really flow and these new opportunities push forward.
Okay, so that's kind of the next question that I have on my list is who are the companies and people who are purchasing hydrogen and how are we supporting the off takers? But when it comes down to the hubs, let's kind of explain the reasoning behind those hubs. I think that would be helpful before we even dive into who are the people who are trying to like engage to buy hydrogen.
Yeah. So we have 7 hubs now, right? And it was passed, was that 2 weeks ago? Something like that. I did a podcast on it. I can't remember. Slept since then.
Toddlers,
Yeah,
man.
so 7 hubs getting initiated all throughout the United States. There's one in the Northwest, one in California, one in Texas, one in the Midwest, and 3 in kind of the Appalachia Northeast area. Now, the extreme Northeast didn't get anything, but kind of that Appalachia area did, and I think a lot of that energy and hydrogen derived from those 3 hubs will flow into the Northeast. But so out of these 7 hubs, it's really broken out that $7 billion is going to be allocated into really all the technologies available. As anyone who has heard my podcast knows, I hate the colors of hydrogen. So I know they say that there's green and blue and pink. Pink, I think you know quite a bit about too. All of them are getting brought into this mix. So if you're in an area that has natural gas to leverage as a feedstock, that's going to be included. If it's electrolytic hydrogen with either nuclear or renewables, that gets to be included. And these hubs, it's not just the hydrogen that gets developed, it's the entire infrastructure around it is all included. And it's not even just all the infrastructure, but the training, the growth of the industry has to be involved. The community has to be involved in these hubs for that funding to go through. And I think that's going to happen in 4 distinct allocations of capital for it. But that's what these hubs were, is a way to really jumpstart that industry, put in just a ton of capital into this opportunity and try to get the cost lower. That was one of the big things about the hydrogen Earthshot initiative, was to get that hydrogen cost down to about $1 a kilogram. Now that was for specifically green hydrogen, electrolytic with renewables. And we'll see what happens with other feedstock sources too. So we'll kind of see what happens whenever that gets going. So that's what the hubs represent. I mean, is there anything in your world that I've kind of missed on the hubs? Is there anything you've heard about?
No, another thing that I think it's really important to talk about why these hubs are spread out across the United States is hydrogen transportation is still a very large issue that we are
It is.
encountering. As far as like pipelines, are we going to put it on the roads? How are we actually going to transport this product? So, making
Mhm.
those hubs segregated in areas which are heavy in industry that's already reliant on hydrogen, that's what was really important in my view when I was seeing them pop up where they were.
Yeah. And I know that there were two large areas that were a bit disappointed that they didn't get funding for these hubs, one being the Southwest, the other being the Southeast part of the US. Well, the good news is, and I've talked with New Mexico about this, the capital didn't stop. The hub that's coming into New Mexico is going forward with or without that federal funding. And some were even happy that they didn't get the federal funding. They don't have to worry about federal regulations getting this project up and running. So there's some give and take to that. But to your point, takeaway is extremely difficult with hydrogen. It's the smallest molecule in the universe. It's just eats through everything. So it's very hard to keep it encapsulated and transport it. So depending on who you talk to, the options are you can compress it and transport it. You can liquefy it and transport it. You can do a combination of the two, cryocompression and transport it. And that can either go in pipelines or tanks. It can be stored underground in salt domes or in other containers, which is underground storage containers is what the ACES project for California. That's what they're doing. So it is difficult to get it from one place to another. Hopefully, we'll see another hub opportunity pop up in the Southeast and get ultimately what I would love to see is kind of a trans US hydrogen network established where you don't really have to worry about taking hydrogen made in the Gulf Coast and send it to, I don't know, South Carolina, something like that. So hopefully that's going to be one of the big tricks is getting hydrogen from one place to another. Now, in Europe, it's a bit of a different story. For a long time, they've had what is known as the hydrogen backbone plant, and that's taking natural gas lines, start mixing in hydrogen into that network, and then also building out hydrogen pipelines. And I mean, Italy 2 years ago were testing starting with 5% integration for hydrogen and going up to 40% just to seeing what kind of material degradation they would have. So it's much more progressive in Europe trying to leverage their pipeline network and including hydrogen in that. And there's also the opportunity to transport ammonia through pipeline, even though it's a little more dangerous than like, even methane. So the give and take. And I think as technology gets progressed in that area, we'll also see new opportunities come into play about how best to transport things.
I was literally talking to a metallurgical engineer today on this
Smarter than
topic.
me.
Oh gosh, I can't even say the word. So I was talking to him about where we're at in Canada in the permitting process of the pipelines and how they're still even doing dispersion studies and how there has not been a purely hydrogen pipeline permitted yet within like for large transport distance, like short little offtake pipelines. Yes, but nothing large. So it'll be interesting. I tried to prompt him for timing on it, and he was even unclear of when that would really happen, when we're going to see some of those larger diameter transportation lines for hydrogen.
It's extremely expensive. I mean, what is it? I can't remember if it's Air Liquide, Air Products. I can't remember who it is that has the 1,600 miles of pipeline in the Gulf Coast. That's really about it. There's not a whole lot of pipeline transportation. And, the pipes are expensive. And ultimately, I was talking with a guy by the name of Mike Lewis, who works at UT. Again, another super smart person. that makes my eyes go cross whenever he just talks because he's so off the charts smart. He was part of the High Velocity Project when it first got off the ground. He was kind of running the whole show, and he was giving me some insights about that project and what's going on with it. And he said, they were looking at, if they expanded west into the Permian and what that would look like if they generated hydrogen in the Permian Basin. How are they going to get that energy to the Gulf Coast? Do they pipe it? I mean, it's what is it, 70 miles from El Paso to Houston, something like that. So at least that far in pipeline to get hydrogen down. Or you generate the electricity off of it and transport it through an electrical line all the way. And that's a lot of copper. So it's regardless, it's immensely expensive to your point earlier about transporting the energy across the US. And that's where everyone's really starting to churn and think about how best to get hydrogen moved from one area to another.
I could talk about that probably all day, but I wanna talk about the economics around green versus blue right now. You would have really enjoyed it. I got Jillian Evanko to tell her daughter's color of hydrogen joke. Do
Oh
you
yeah.
remember it?
Is Jillian not the best?
She really is. Like,
She is.
I'm wowed by her authentic leadership all the time. Let's tell the joke for everybody here. It's, what is the difference between pink hydrogen, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, orange hydrogen?
What is it?
Nothing. That's it. Nothing. It's all
There's no
hydrogen.
difference.
It is all hydrogen. But when it comes down to, I know you really dislike this color scheme,
Yeah.
green versus blue. Like, when it comes down to the economics of it and the levelized cost of hydrogen, I think the last time I checked, blue is around like, $1 to $3 per kilogram, depending on gas prices. Green was around $3 to $6 per kilogram, which is derived from like the capex or the capital expense of the electrolyzer and its operational cost. Where does that pricing currently sit right now? Are you aware of it?
It still varies. And when you're talking about whether it's levelized cost or just straight cost, electrolytic hydrogen, it's what the factors you need to take in are, how much does it cost to get the water, and then your kilowatt hour price to generate the electricity. With the thermolytic or natural gas or SMR, you need to think about the feedstock that you have. You also have a water cost associated with it. And then to run your equipment, you still also need your kilowatt hour cost. So with those three factors compared to the two factors, it's still 70 to 80% cheaper to run your natural gas feedstock thermolytic hydrogen versus the green electrolytic with renewables. And I think the prices haven't moved that much. Honestly, blue's come down quite a bit just because natural gas has dropped from $8 to, I don't know, what is it now, 250, something like that, per MMCF. And so that's one of the other things that has to be factored in is the variable costs associated with natural gas versus a much more steady state cost with electrolytic. And electrolytic, as you know, can be that the pink, the nuclear derived, or the renewables. To me, those are almost one and the same. I like pink more just because I value nuclear sources more than renewables right now, just because renewables aren't that efficient.
Mhm.
That's going to change in the future. Efficiencies are going to increase. But as things sit right now, the cheapest is the gray hydrogen, so SMR with no carbon capture. And then next would be the blue, so gray with carbon capture. And then green is on that other end of the spectrum. And I've heard anywhere between $6 and $9 a kilogram, depending on where you are in your kilowatt hour price. There are, though, much cheaper and, in my opinion, better technological solutions outside of those two. One that I mentioned earlier, natural hydrogen. You just drill for it and it's there. It's a little bit deep, it's in the bedrock, but that is still not a depth that's unheard of. Oh, if we're talking, depending on where it is, 10 to 15,000 feet depth, that's not that deep. They're hitting that all the time. So it's not that difficult to get it out of the ground for natural hydrogen. The other one is turquoise. It's one of my favorites. I love talking about turquoise hydrogen. If you don't know what turquoise hydrogen is, it's using natural gas as your feedstock. You shoot plasma at it, and you end up with hydrogen and black carbon or carbon black. I can't remember which one it is, but it's solid carbon. So no CO2, you get hydrogen, and you get one of the most amazing materials ever, solid carbon. If you ever do any other shows on energy stuff and you look up graphene, graphite, carbon fiber, carbon nanotubes, all of these tertiary products are derived from just solid carbon, and it's beautiful. And just to have a technology that gives you immense energy with one of the best uh, building blocks known to man, that technology blows my mind. And Monolith here in the US have been doing it for years, but they did it to get the carbon and they used it for pigments. So they used it for computer inks and plastics, and they never did anything with the hydrogen. Well, now all of a sudden there's a market for hydrogen too, and an even rapidly growing market for carbon. So when I talk about colors, I can't not talk about pink and turquoise and natural, which is clear or white or gold. It's got like three different colors associated with it.
So, in this hydrogen panel discussion, we also agreed that whenever we start to standardize how we talk about carbon intensities associated
Mhm.
with the molecule, because that's what they're trying to go towards, is in order to help everybody standardize to know what we're talking about, they're going to try and change the color scheme from, pink, green, blue, whatever, to how carbon intensive the molecule
Yeah,
is to give you like kind of a background of where it's derived from. But
right.
the compromise was is we still need to have, like, a color associated with it, in my opinion, to know where it's truly derived from and because it's beautiful. You think about the rainbow, and I had never heard of turquoise hydrogen until you just told me. That is
Oh,
so cool.
good. You can go down that rabbit hole and just waste a day looking at how gorgeous turquoise hydrogen is. But that's what I talk about all the time on the podcast is really it's all about the carbon intensity. And regardless of where you are in the US on the political spectrum, when this hub opportunity came about and they said, we're not going to focus on technologies, we're not going to focus on colors, we're going to focus on what's clean and what isn't. And I thought that was beyond brilliant. That's how it needs to be. And it also depends on how far back you want to go into the carbon intensity score of hydrogen. Are you going to look at how the feedstock gets developed? Are you going to look at how the energy supply gets established? If we look at the carbon intensity of renewables, are we going to talk about where those materials are made and developed and shipped and processed and then brought over? Or are we just going to say that's a sunk cost? We're not going to consider that for this carbon intensity score. So there are a lot of questions involved with that CI and what is really clean. And there are some studies right now going on just to see, what is the CI score of those renewables? Is it, are they as clean as we think they are? I'm not saying they are or aren't because the study hasn't been finished yet, but it's still an important question to ask. And when all of that comes around and we finally have legitimate carbon intensity scores, we'll know what really is clean, what isn't, and how better to allocate capital to certain projects.
So let's stick on this kind of topic of standardization. Like, we're
Hmm.
trying to get everybody to speak the same language in hydrogen right now because it's almost so new. One of the panelists that I was discussing with kind of referred to this as a startup company. Like,
Yeah.
you never really know what is going to happen because nobody has standardized regulations yet. Nobody has standardized terminology even. So do you know some of the standardization things that are needing to occur in order for us to start speaking that same language?
The government's doing a good job here in the US, and they're trying to do the same sorts of things in Europe. Uh, but there's still just so much infighting about getting things standardized. You know, the policies surrounding everything, and when you get politics involved, it gets cloudy, and you have lobbyists on both sides trying to define this industry to best suit their own needs. And we don't know, like, for instance, the three pillars. Do you know about the three pillars?
I feel like I've heard him, but tell me,
So
remind.
the three pillars for, and it's really mainly focused on green, is additionality, time matching, and regionality. Those are your three pillars. So additionality means that if you're gonna set up a green hydrogen project somewhere, you can't pull from the existing grid. You have to add additional equipment out there to generate your own electricity because it's already maxed out. You can't do anything. You have to add the equipment. Time matching, you have to, and this really makes my brain twist up because I don't even understand it that much. Is, for the time that you use, you have to allocate that time towards how much time was actually spent on the grid. And that's really kind of confusing. But then you also have regionality, meaning that if we set up a hydrogen project in Texas, we can't use some renewables grid in Colorado. It has to be within a certain geographic area. So there are a lot of these regulatory issues coming into play, not just here in the US, but also in Europe, really hamstringing the development of the green industry to grow and to flourish. I know the U.S. Hydrogen Alliance in California is doing a lot to fight the good fight on that. So more power to them. And if you ever get a chance to talk to Roxana over there, do it. Again, wealth of knowledge, knows everything there is to know about regulatory policies around hydrogen. She's incredible. I'm going to try to get her on the show too if our calendars ever align. But, as far as standards go, the I interviewed someone from the Gas Council in the US, and they're working on standardizations and safety practices to go forward. It's still, like you said, it's so new.
Mhm.
And, the podcast in our consulting company is still a startup in a startup in another startup. It's all so new that we're all just kind of adjusting and working, going with the flow to get it moving forward as best we can.
Do me a favor and give me and everybody else listening your elevator pitch kind of about the hydrogen tool that you helped develop because I think that I have a lot of customers and a lot of people
Yeah.
who would be very interested.
So my background is in location analytics, GIS, mapping, uh, in energy and outside of energy. But so when we set up the parent company for the hydrogen podcast, it's Key Hydrogen. I developed an online, but it's online now, but a map to help understand for us and for the client just what opportunities are available in any given area. And we thought, why keep this behind the scenes? Let's send it out into the world and see if it can make a difference to other companies. So we created the H2 Advantage. And the H2 Advantage uses some public, open, and some proprietary data sets in the US, in Europe, and Australia, along with global hydrogen projects, uh, just for effectively prospecting, hydrogen prospecting, to say, we want to set up something in Atlanta. What is available there now? What needs to happen for it to grow? If there's nothing there right now, where could it be? Or if we're a solar company, where are all of our assets? Where could demand be the highest? How can we leverage our existing systems to best utilize this? Where are some projects right now that could be potential off takers? Where are high CO2 emitting companies that are going to want to decarbonize their infrastructure? That's where we can get more immediate offtake. Um, and that's why we built it out, was to further the hydrogen industry through location analytics, location intelligence, and it's something that one of the things that I noticed when I got into oil and gas was just the hesitancy to adopt new technologies. It's a very risk averse industry, so I don't want to see that with hydrogen. Let's break down those walls, those barriers, and help, use what technology is available now in this industry to get it moving forward as fast as possible.
Paul, I feel like there's a part 2 coming up between you and I. I'm
Happy
just
to.
Yes, okay, because I do wanna honor your time, and I have enjoyed this conversation so much, and to see a little bit more of your passion and why you're doing some of these things in order to help these things become a reality, that just makes me so much more proud to know you, and I whatever I can do to support you in this journey too, like, I'm here. Let's save the world together, man.
Let's do it. Well, we're all on the same team here. We're doing good work,
Yeah.
all
Well,
of us.
everybody, I hope you stay happy. Most importantly, stay safe, but generate your own happiness. And Paul, do you have anything else that you want to say?
Come check out the podcast. It's the Hydrogen Podcast. You can also see what we're doing at keyhydrogen.com. We've got some, like I said, the location analytics. We've got a lot of high level information on the hubs in the US. We set up a nice story map around that too, and some great insight into each of the hubs coming to the site also. So check it out.
Woo. Thank you all so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe so you're notified every time a podcast is released. Find Elemental Energy on Facebook and connect with me, Marsha Leonard, on LinkedIn. But lastly, and most importantly, share this podcast with your family and your friends, especially if you are in the energy industry and you're having an influence on the path of decarbonization. I'm on this journey figuring things out, and I want you guys to come along. So the closer I can get to you and the more I can connect with you, the better this show will be and become.